Hi guys, so I'm back with a new video, obviously. I don't know why I always end up saying that. So for this week's video, I'm going to do a review, actually two reviews for two books that I recently read in January. And I'm going to try to make this as short as possible, so we'll see. So, I'm just like really thirsty right now. I literally got home and just set up my camera and the lights so that I could tape this so I could have a video up for this week. The first book that I'm going to review for you is Witches of East End by Melissa de la Cruz. And I had mentioned this in a book haul. I got this from Barnes & Noble and I read it about 2 weeks ago. Originally I had picked up this book because I had seen the show Witches of East End, which is on Lifetime. And I liked the show, and because I liked the show I decided that I was going to read the books to see if it was even better than the show. Normally when it comes to books and their adaptations, whether it's a TV show or movies, I'm normally a fan of the books more so than their adaptations. But I have to say that in this instance, for Witches of East End, I'm a fan more of the show than I am of the book. I think the show's writers did a really good job making the show interesting because the book, for me, felt short. I found that the plot was pretty weak, the characters didn't hold my interest, and the pace was kind of quick. The plot itself just wasn't really interesting. It wasn't really complex. It just couldn't, I don't know, I just felt myself kind of wandering off and thinking about the show while I was reading the book, because I felt like the show had more, and I don't want to compare both, but I feel like the show was much more complex in different storylines versus the book. It was just very like, it was more of like an easy reading. There wasn't that much things happening that kept my attention for long. I didn't really find the characters that compelling. I felt like they were pretty boring. They weren't relatable for me. I couldn't really connect with them on a deeper level. One of the characters, Ingrid, I found her to be even more disagreeable in the books than she is in the show. And Freya, who I do like in the show, in the book I just kind of just went along with her story, but I didn't really have an opinion either which way about the characters. They were kind of just, they were there for me. Yeah, and the plot was just like very simple. The way that, I guess what I felt was that the characters were almost kind of one-dimensional. They didn't really have that many facets to their personality. It was just very, very simple. That's like the only way that I can really explain how I felt about the book. It was basically kind of, even though they're the same characters, I was infusing the book with the complexity of the characters from the show in order to keep myself interested, because I just found it really, really boring. Which is a letdown because normally I like the books better. But I still have Serpent's Kiss, which is the second part to that book, to read. So I will read that eventually and see how that compares to the first book. Maybe she just needed to kind of build upon the story a little bit in the first one, and it got a little bit better in the second one. Yeah, so that's how I feel about that. The second book that I have to review for you is The Third Kingdom by Terry Goodkind, or Goodkind. And this is the second book in the Richard and Kahlan novels, which I had mentioned when I bought the book, that Richard and Kahlan are characters part of his other series, which is the Sword of Truth series, and the book before that one is The Omen Machine. Yeah, so I've mentioned this as well. I'm a huge, huge, huge fan of Terry Goodkind, and I love his Sword of Truth books. Like, I love them. I think they're, like, amazing. But this book actually fell short for me as well. I was actually very surprised. Being a fan of all the books that he's written with those same characters, I thought that I would love this one just as much as I have loved the other ones. But I actually didn't really love it. I liked it, but I didn't love it. And I had several, I guess, issues with the book, and I'll tell you what they are. I did start the book off feeling very excited to find out what had happened to the characters based on how he had left off for the previous book, for the Omen Machine. And then at some point I just kind of lost that enthusiasm. I started noticing when I was reading that he was being very, very repetitive. There were like conversations between characters that lasted pages, which could have been cut down to last maybe 1 or 2, because he was repeating the same information. It became bizarre at some point where characters, they would say something to each other, and then the next time they would speak, they would start like rephrasing the same thing they just previously said, because there was no need to repeat so much of the same information over and over again. And then once a new character would be introduced into the scenario, then they would repeat the same dialogue that they had previously, again rephrasing it, and then sometimes he wouldn't even rephrase it, he would just kind of just repeat the same thing that he was saying. So as a reader, that becomes boring because I've already heard this, the characters have heard this, and how many times can we keep hearing it? The book has 526 pages, and I think he could have gotten his points across in half the number of pages that he wrote. So I think that's why he was very repetitive. He wanted to drag the book out as much as possible, which I don't think that's fair, to drag it out and make your readers read the same kind of text over and over again. In terms of the characters, I felt that Richard's voice, he's pretty much the main character, his voice was very weak. I just found it lacking the intensity, the emotion that normally is always there. And this book, he just felt very like weak, very subdued. There wasn't much life to him when he would speak. And then when Terry would write in thoughts that he was having, again, those thoughts were always repetitive also. And then he would throw in bizarre things that it didn't sound like Richard would say or think to himself. Which again, I think it just went hand in hand with the fact that he wanted to drag out the book, and I guess he became a little bit lazy writing it. He wrote, there was one line that, if I went back and I counted how many times he said it, I'm sure he said that line like way too many times. It was something like, that makes sense. And it wasn't only Richard that said it, Kahlan said it a couple times as well. And it was just weird. The style of the writing, well, first up, because Richard's voice and Kahlan's voice didn't suit some of the dialogue that he was giving them. And then they were repeating the same kind of words. So it was almost to the point, it was like a neutral voice that he just inserted. And it's like, okay, I don't know what's right here, so let me just tell them, let me just say that they say this line. And I'll just keep reusing that every time that I don't know what to say. You know, anything profound. Which, a lazy writing, honestly. So I found that the conversations that he had with one of the characters, Sammy or Samantha, were the slowest. I had to force myself to read those parts. When he was having a conversation with Sammy during one part of the book, it dragged on for I think two chapters or something like that, and it was the longest, most repetitive, unimportant conversation. He could have probably gotten it across in like half a page. What he needed what he needed the readers to understand and his characters too. But instead, he just wanted to fill pages, which felt hard for me at times to focus and want to finish reading, because I felt halfway through that if this was how he was starting off the book, then it was probably going to progress exactly the same way towards the end of the book. And like I said, it's a 500-something page book. Kahlan didn't appear that much in the book. She appeared towards the end. And her voice was also pretty weak. But not as weak as Richard's voice. I feel like his voice was just much more weaker for some reason. And Kahlan's was lacking as well, but not as much as Richard's. But then the thing with Kahlan was that he waited until the last, literally a couple chapters towards the end to tell her story, or her point of view. And he spent the majority of the book just giving the readers like a little bit of information, and then everything ended up happening more towards the end of the book. And I still hated some of the characters that I hated from last time, like Abbott Dreer. I hate that. I hate his character so much. I felt like his voice and his his voice carried across from the Omen Machine to this one, but for some reason his main characters just didn't translate well for this book. I don't know. And I really just think that it had to do with him wanting to put out another book, and this was sort of like a filler book before he gets into like the main story, which is the next book. So I guess he just wanted to put whatever random things he could put together and only give a little bit of information, because a lot of things didn't really happen in this book. The big chunk of the drama or the climax pretty much happened mostly in the end. So there were a lot of pages that he could have skipped and cut out, but I guess he wanted a longer book. Okay, so those are my 2 reviews for the books that I read, the last 2 books that I read in January. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions on any of the 2 books that I've mentioned. If you've read them, what are your thoughts on them? And as usual, I'll list all my links below so that you could read these books or follow me or whatever it is. And I will see you guys next week for a new video. And that's it. Bye!